audiobook reading of Nations by Ascended Master Hilarion, published in 1980. Section 1. Foreword on Karma. The beginnings of humanity on this planet are shrouded in the mists of antiquity, inaccessible to all but a few individuals who have learned to attune themselves to the eternal record that is written on the etheric scrolls. These ones know the true dimensions of the great pilgrimage that mankind has made to the present critical point, and know as well that the turmoil and destruction of recent times have been foreshadowed in all true prophecy, whether in scriptures, in the writings of renowned seers like Nostradamus, or indeed within the intricate turnings of the planets in their courses. Never before in the history of the race has such frightful danger coexisted with such glorious promise. It is common knowledge that the world's mightiest nations now possess sufficient destructive power to obliterate every shred of civilization from this earth. Offsetting this dark menace is the spontaneous growth of an inner spiritual yearning in many millions of people who previously gave little thought to the more sublime aspects of existence. And as this spiritual radiance has brightened in some parts of the world, so the dark, roiling storm clouds have retreated, finding elsewhere scattered pockets where light is all but extinguished, and they're twisting men's passions into the contorted shapes of fear, vengeance, and rage. Those who have merited a birth into one of the protected regions of the earth little realize how desperate is the plight of the ones who have volunteered to incarnate in the midst of these dark clouds. Desperate, not because of the poverty, war, or famine that surround them, though these conditions are dreadful enough, but rather because of the inner darkness that has drawn them into these very conditions. For these things are not governed by chance. Many imagine that pure hazard decrees where one shall be born, and then they blame an unjust God for his cruelty. Others are so appalled by the suffering that they retreat into apathy. Yet others, often prompted by murky religious concepts, think that some sort of plan is being worked out, but are not able to explain that plan in a satisfactory manner. The key that is missing, the link that can unite all of the apparent chaos and suffering into a just and plausible scheme, is the concept that each individual born into the earth is merely taking on a new physical body, and that his habits and actions in previous bodies have determined the opportunities and the hardships which are his now. It is deplorable that the main Western religions have turned their backs upon this truth, a truth which was part of the credo of most early Christian writers until the Council of Nicaea voted to erase all scriptural reference to reincarnation. Even so, they did not dare to tamper with Jesus' own statement that John the Baptist was the reincarnation of Elias stated in Matthew chapter 11 and Mark chapter 9. What we are saying is that a proper grasp of the principle of rebirth and the related principle of karma not only makes reality understandable, but shows God to be just. We see in the near future a great excitement among humanity as the truth of reincarnation gradually spreads among all peoples. Indeed, numerous individuals already acknowledge this principle without even admitting it to themselves. How many have said, in a moment of exasperation, "What did I ever do to deserve this?" Were they not stating the very law of karma upon which cosmic justice rests? It is the same law which Christ was evoking when he said that those who live by the sword must die by the sword. If this statement were taken to refer only to a single life, it would be manifestly untrue, for have not many murderers died peacefully in their beds? Yet, seen in the light of the rebirth principle, the dictum makes far more sense. It asserts that justice shall follow the murderer even if it does not work itself out in the same life in which the misdeed was committed. In some incarnation, now or later, he himself must die by the sword. An interesting facet of this karmic principle is its great effectiveness in teaching humanity to have compassion. Let us explain this point more fully. Everyone is generally aware of the fact that, in ages past, human beings tended to be very calloused and unfeeling towards each other. At the time of Jesus, for example, there was little respect for human life, hardly any consideration for the suffering of another, and absolutely no feeling of any kind for the animals. Children were regularly beaten, tied up, even hung on the wall to keep them out of an adult's way. A soldier would think nothing of running his sword through a passing stranger, merely to determine whether the cutting edge was still sharp. These inhuman attitudes persist even today in many of the darkened places of the earth. And yet, particularly in the Western democratic nations, one finds many individuals who are polite and considerate, and who feel it deeply when others around them are suffering. This is the essence of compassion. The word literally means to suffer with another. This trait has also been called empathy. It might surprise the Earth's compassionate individuals to learn that their empathetic nature arises because of their own previous suffering. In effect, what happens when one perceives another person in pain is the rekindling of a memory of one's own previous painful episodes, whether in this life or in a previous one. Hence, what one feels initially is a memory, pain which is evoked by the suffering of the other person. Some individuals merely feel the empathy, they suffer with the person who is undergoing the pain. But others are prompted by their own pain, memories to try to relieve the suffering. Initially, the person may do this because, by relieving the suffering in the other, the source of his own pain memory will be removed. But repeated episodes of such help will gradually become ingrained into the individual as a habit of compassionate kindness, and the result will eventually be to incorporate that wonderful trait into the soul itself. It is thus that the karmic necessity to suffer the same pain we have caused others brings with it an automatic antidote to the kind of attitude that gives rise to the karma in the first place. Think of it as a progression. In the primitive stage, the soul is darkened, insular, and lacking in empathy. A life is lived during which pain is caused to others through violent actions. In subsequent lives, the soul inhabits bodies which are made to suffer the same pain which the soul once meted out to others. As a result of that karmic meeting of the self, the soul stores pain, memories which can be evoked by witnessing similar suffering. Finally, the soul has become so sensitized by pain that it reacts immediately to any scenario in which another is seen to be suffering. At first, the soul is simply overcome with calm passion. It suffers with the other. Perhaps the soul will wish to leave the presence of the sufferer in order to stop its own pain, memories. But at a more mature point, the soul learns to reach out a helping hand to relieve the suffering. When Christ told the story of the Good Samaritan, the teaching was utterly revolutionary. Few people at that time had any compassion for their fellow man. In many parts of today's world, this is still true. And those are the regions where suffering must continue, not only to settle the scales of karmic justice, but to teach human beings how to feel the suffering of others. The suffering of man, however, has many more purposes beyond the two just explained. Among the most important is that of demonstrating to humanity in the starkest possible terms the rage and the hatred that burn in its breast. It is true that many gentle, peaceful individuals are now incarnated upon the earth, but at the same time, there are millions who are cruel, vindictive, violent, and aggressive. If we look at the human family as one collective entity, we see frightfully dark patches scattered throughout it, with only occasional points of illumination. And since humanity is a single being, seen from a cosmic perspective, it follows that darkness in any part of it must affect all other parts in some manner. The earth is like a stage on which this collective human being can act out its internal traits, so that it can perceive that the traits are there. In this sense, the earth is like a mirror which reflects back faithfully the inner states of the beings who inhabit her. And with the development of the nuclear bomb, mankind has fashioned for itself a weapon of incredible destructive power, a weapon that will provide a demonstration of just how much blackness there really is in the race. We are hopeful that a large-scale unleashing of these doomsday machines can be averted and we see a distinct possibility that the transition from the present time of chaos into the new age of love and light can be accomplished without requiring all nations to be entirely disintegrated. Such disintegration will assuredly occur in many areas where the populace has not learned to anchor the light of a higher spiritual perspective, but in some regions, especially in North America, the prospects are growing brighter all the time that the transition into the new dawn can be brought about by internal changes in the people themselves, without requiring them to be forced through a critical period of great suffering, destruction, and deprivation. But only time will tell. Mankind has the gift of free will, and this gift defies attempts by seers, whether on the earth or on higher planes, to perceive accurately what the future holds. This means that we too are limited as to the accuracy of any prophecy which we attempt. The best we can do is to describe the most probable line of developments at the time we are asked for the prophecy. This is what all prophets have ever done, including the biblical seers. However, there is a requirement among the spiritual laws which govern this planet that events prophesied in the Bible must be seen to come to pass by at least some human beings, in at least some area of the world. This requirement is not too difficult to fulfill for the entities who guide man's destiny. They simply arrange for things to turn out the way they are prophesied. Some latitude is allowed in the case of symbolic prophecy, such as that in the Book of Revelations. But even here, most of the commonly accepted interpretations of that book's visions will be enacted upon the earth. It is something like the story circulated about Nostradamus, according to which his grave was dug up by grave robbers more than 100 years after his death. The robbers received the fright of their lives when, upon opening the casket, they found around the neck of the skeleton a wooden plaque bearing the precise date of the grave robbing. This story has mystified many and has been used to attest to Nostradamus's miraculous powers of prophecy. However, the explanation is quite straightforward. His guides showed him in a vision the plaque and the required date, and he left instructions that such a plaque was to be buried with him. Then, just before the date on the plaque, the guides of the robbers arranged for them to conceive the idea of plundering the grave, and they controlled the timing to make the date exactly fit. Hence, they vindicated Nostradamus's fabulous powers by manipulation. Compare this with the prophetic's mother who predicts to her son that he will ride on a merry-go-round the next day and then arranges for him to be taken to an amusement park where he does just that. The child might well be impressed with his mother's predictive gift. Returning to the time of trouble, as it has often been called, we wish to discuss two further purposes for the chaos and destruction, which will gather in strength over the next few years. One purpose has to do with the negativity of thought and feeling, which mankind has cast about this planet like a clammy poultice of darkness. In a real sense, thoughts and emotions are things. This means that on a subtle level they can continue to exist even after their creator has ceased to entertain them. There are many sensitive people, for example, who can tell upon walking into a room that it had been the scene of a previous fight or argument. They sense it. In reality, they are responding to the persisting cloud of negativity which the argument created. The vast darkness of thought and emotion which clings to this planet must be dissipated. One of the quickest ways to do this is to allow the cloud to bring about destructive activity on the earth, which is of the same nature as itself. It is true that if enough individuals could learn to use the full power of their minds in the right way, the negative cloud could be transmuted into a harmless energy and used positively. But we do not see this happening on a sufficient scale before the cloud begins to precipitate the violent activity, which will cause it to disintegrate. The other purpose of the current time of testing for humanity is distressing to have to discuss, for it relates to the dividing of the human race into two parts, a separation of the light from the dark in the spiritual sense. Those who have striven to improve, learn, and grow do not deserve to be held back indefinitely by the larger group who do not wish to evolve spiritually. The latter must be allowed to follow a darker and longer path of development, more suited to teaching them what they must learn, but they cannot be permitted to incarnate on the earth during the new kingdom of the Spirit that soon will begin. That kingdom, the new age of miracles, is reserved for those who have sided with truth, justice, mercy, and love. Chapter 1. The Spiritual Nation of Nations. The world has reached a critical point in its development. Men are revealing to themselves the depths of the depravity of which they are capable. The terror and destruction will increase until man understands that he is himself the reason and the cause of his own predicament. Through many ages, man has been learning the spiritual lessons which the earth was meant to teach. All the great religions have urged upon him the same path: to love his brother as himself and to love his God above all. Many have come to show the way to reach higher ground spiritually. At the beginning of each great age, a way shower appears, but almost without exception, these great souls are hounded, persecuted, and finally destroyed by those who do not wish to see the truth. The time for learning nears its end. Man cannot be allowed indefinitely to harm his brother, to lay waste the planet which has nurtured him, and to revile his Creator. A last chance is being prepared to save the world. This time the attempt will not be through the sacrifice of a great soul, but through the sacrifice of the earth itself. A period of 7 years has begun to run, during which all of the base passions and vile instincts of man will be allowed to run freely and to wreak the havoc that is their very nature. To the destructive urges of man himself will be added calamities and upheavals of a natural kind. And then, in the final phases, the intervention of supernatural influence will make itself felt in order to bring the time of trial to a close. If there were no intervention from higher planes, the destruction and terror would linger on for many decades until everything in the earth had been destroyed, and this beautiful planet turned into a sterile wasteland where not even the humblest blade of grass could ever grow again. The scriptures of many religions have spoken of this time, but man has thought himself impervious to such warnings, and able to protect himself through his knowledge and science from the worst that the prophets foresaw. As the years of trial gather in intensity, men will begin to see that the last days are upon them. Some will recognize the truth early, while others will delay. The skeptics, the atheists, and those whose hearts have hardened against their God will be among the last to turn toward the light. There will be some who will not turn. For these, the great effort will have been wasted. There can be no further chance to come to the truth, and they must perish with the other evils that have afflicted the earth. The paragraphs which follow are meant to give a perspective on the events now taking place, which is more spiritual than the viewpoints normally offered on the earth plane. Those who have ears to hear will recognize the truth, while others whose understanding is not yet opened will cast these warnings aside and forget them. And yet perhaps a seed will be planted, which later can come to flower. When the worst of the storm is unleashed, it is hoped that some will remember that they were warned and will seek to understand the truth before it is too late. Chapter 2. Italy has lost her soul. She has lost the center she once had, for this was the Holy See. In place of this soul center, there is only a wasteland where human beings prey upon each other like animals. When the depravity reaches its lowest ebb, an even greater evil will rise from the mire of this land. It will bring order, but it will be the order of slaves, without freedom or love. Italy has forgotten her purpose, which was to show the light of religious devotion to the world. This country only pretends to hold the church in reverence. In reality, Christ is mocked by the godlessness which the Marxists have taught. For that sin, the communist theories will be blotted out forever from the memory of mankind. After the tribulation, nothing will remain of this unfortunate land. Its inhabitants must perish, and all their works must crumble to dust. Let the other nations of the world heed well the lesson of Italy, their sister. All are facing the judgment, and all will be found wanting. Chapter 3. China has lost her greatness. Where once there was poetry, music, and wisdom, there is now only the arid and paltry thought of Mao. Her great thinkers have gone, and the flower of her civilization has died. The souls who now inhabit this land can see no farther than each other. They will never lift up their eyes unto the hills. If men cannot acknowledge a common father, how can they look upon each other as brothers? It is this lack of brotherhood which will start China upon a march of bloodshed, pillage, and destruction, such as the world has not seen since God sent his scourge Attila to chastise the nations that had strayed from his ways. But for the part they will play in the years of trial ahead, the Chinese people will perish to a man. Not a trace will be left. She is not to be mourned. Her citizens are already dead to all spiritual things. No restitution would be enough to salvage this desolate country from its fate. The best of China still lives in those who have escaped from the spiritual winter that now lies over the land. Chapter 4. Russia has lost her passion. Once she was a country where men loved life and the joys of living. All that is gone now. Her people are morose, tired and burdened. She groans under a tyranny that wishes to drain the lifeblood itself from the country's veins. Before this land can be regenerated, she must cast off the oppression that lies upon her. But this will only come through upheaval and the destruction of the Russian nation as it exists today. This country will be led to play a tragic part in the trials to come. She will find herself in the thick of the Holocaust that is to descend upon the earth. In that terrible crucible, she will again be purified, but so little will remain that the memory of Russia's glory will be overshadowed and vanish in the new life of other nations. Chapter 5. Iran has lost her sanity. In ages past, she held sway over a mighty empire. Her kings and her commoners kept the holy writings in their hearts and in their minds. But her prophets have abandoned her. She bends now before one who is determined to instill all of his own venom into the very soul of the country. The citizens who are caught in the web of control are mesmerized by his glittering personality, and have given up their reason to the holy war of hatred he has spawned. In the current phase of conflict and war, this doomed country is reaping the only reward which spitefulness and contempt can possibly have: destruction. She has named her enemies, and they have begun to tear her to shreds. No other fate could possibly await a nation into whose very bloodstream the poisons of bitter contempt and hatred have been poured. She does not deserve to be mourned, for she has only met the destiny that she herself has prepared. But pray for the souls of those who inhabit her. The desperate hope of the entities who guide the fate of Iran is that this experience of destruction will at last teach her sons and daughters that only goodwill can preserve the state, and that only love can keep the souls of men intact. Chapter 6. Switzerland has lost her honor. Once this country was a place where a man's word was respected, where a promise was held to be a debt unpaid. When a country forgets its honor, it is not long before its moral tone disintegrates. This is happening now in Switzerland. There was a time when this country understood the importance of gold to the economic stability of the world. Her bankers knew that without gold, governments would be led to print false money to satisfy their own greed, robbing honest men through inflation. Switzerland has a duty to the world, a duty that is not being fulfilled. She was appointed the keeper of honor in commerce among nations. Because she has failed, her chastity will be tossed aside by an invader in the years of trouble ahead, and her once unassailable integrity will be trampled underfoot and forgotten. All nations have a crucial lesson to learn in the fate of Switzerland. It is this: to cherish honor highest among the virtues, lest the validity it lends to the lesser qualities be taken away. Chapter 7. Austria has lost her past. Her empire once ruled many peoples and produced great works of art, literature, and music. Her statesmen moved upon the world stage like giants, bringing the benefits of her civilized ways to many countries. No longer can Austria make her weight felt in the affairs of the world. She is reduced to a humble estate conquered and shamed in 2 wars, not daring any more to raise her voice in the councils of men. Her fall is a warning to the nations of the world, for she had a fatal flaw. Her arrogance brought her to obscurity. She will not regain her lost greatness. The pressures of the coming tribulation will be too much for this weakened nation to withstand. Like a frail leaf in a storm, she will be swept away, engulfed by events she does not comprehend. The lesson of this country is plain. A prideful nation cannot endure long upon the earth, for when pride directs the footsteps, the sustaining strength of God is withdrawn. Chapter 8. France has lost her perceptions. Once she swayed the world with the eloquence of her language, the clarity of her thought, and the lucid writings of her philosophers. All this has vanished now. France is like an aging scholar whose faculties have dimmed, struggling to grasp again the ideas and concepts that once were mastered so easily. The complexities of the modern world are beyond her understanding. The great rhythms of civilization, once the very pulse beat of this country, now are stilled. France is in a period of confusion and searching. She seeks the intellectual anchor she once had, but knows it is lost forever. If this country can learn the great lesson that faces it today, France can stand among the victors in the day of battle that is looming. The lesson is this, that it is not the intellect but the heart which raises up the spirit from the level of the material world. If the lesson is not learned, then the cold intellectual persuasions of atheism will be her undoing, and she will be led down to her destruction. This noble country can yet be saved by prayer. She must not make the mistake that has snared so many other nations. The world stands to lose much if the greatness of France should perish. Chapter 9. Germany has lost her unity. She has become divided and split between two different ideologies. The strain is tearing her apart. Until this country learns that there is only one true way for men to live together as brothers, she will remain divided and the agony of the partition will continue. This was not always so. In times past, Germany was a united though diverse culture. Her provinces and principalities had their differences, but the ideal of a united empire was held by them all. The lesson Germany is learning is among the hardest for any nation. She must face it alone, for she has one foot in each of the opposed camps. No other nation is in the same perplexity or shares the same struggle. If Germany can learn to bring together the two halves, she will again take her place among the strong nations of the world. In the troubled years to come, she will be forced to meet this challenge squarely. Her agony will be a lesson for the world. The lesson is that unity is essential before a nation can flower. Without unity, there is no hope for development and nothing good can be created. Chapter 10. South Africa has lost her compassion. She was meant to show the world how two races could live together in harmony. She has failed this test, and the world has lost the good that might have been gained through her experience. Once men understood that races of different colors were not superior or inferior, but merely different, and the differences were respected. Each race learned from the other, and there was harmony between them. But an evil has crept into the philosophy that South Africa has adopted toward the black man. She believes them to be inferior, and thus not deserving of the full benefits of her society. For this sin, she will herself be turned into a slave nation, and the white man who now lives in comfort will be reduced to the level of a servant. The time is close at hand. The punishment is sure. The events will unfold, and the world will see the bitter harvest that prejudice and oppression must reap. Chapter 11. India has lost her mysticism. Once she knew that life was more than material concerns, and that many levels of experience lay beyond the physical senses of mankind. She has forgotten that the purpose of life is to return to a higher level of being. Because of her forgetfulness, the protection of the living God will be taken from her, and she will be ground beneath the heel of a foreign oppressor in the years to come. The karma awaiting this nation is very heavy and will bring about the loss of much of her population. Out of the blood and destruction will arise a new India with the purity and the sublime dedication to higher ideals which is so perfectly symbolized in the Taj Mahal. That structure was intended to remind India and the world of a realm of spiritual perfection beyond the earth plane, and to instill in all who see it a feeling of awe, and wonder that such an exquisite temple could be conceived by the mind of man. Chapter 12. Brazil has lost her greatness of vision. Once this country looked upon the jungles to the west and saw not the dark primeval forest, but a vast network of civilization stretching out from the ocean to bring a higher level of living to all. But she has relinquished this vision, and in its place has adopted a narrow, intolerant attitude toward the primitive souls who have merited no more than a birth into a diseased and uneducated tribe of Indians. Each man's duty is to raise his brothers, no matter how deep in the mire they have sunk, to a higher plane of endeavor and understanding. When he fails, the loss is felt not only by those he might have helped, but by himself as well. Because Brazil has failed this task of restoration, she will herself be cut adrift by the stronger and richer nations of the world. When the tribulation years have placed unbearable pressures and strains upon her society, she will collapse into anarchy and brutality, and there will be none to save her. Chapter 13. Poland has lost her nerve. This country was once peopled by valiant and courageous men who rode to battle for their beliefs without thought of their own vulnerability. They were the true heroes of the Second Great War, for they fought against overwhelming odds. All this has changed. Poland bends now to an oppression that is not worthy to be compared to the strength this country once had. She can sing no longer of her heroes, or of the daring deeds they perform. Because of what she has lost, Poland cannot be allowed to share in the new birth of the world after the tribulation years have passed. She will disintegrate early in the trials to come, and her people will be dispersed and absorbed by other nations. Chapter 14. Israel has lost her master. She has forgotten the God who guided her people through the long centuries of affliction and persecution. Because she has forgotten her God, she will be tested in the very center of the crucible when the bitter years are upon the earth. This trial will bring the nation back to God, but only after much has been suffered. Israel has been the repository of a burning faith and devotion for many centuries. She was meant to carry that flame aloft so that, in the tribulation years, new fires could be lighted from it to bring the world back to a true faith. Those of her people who remained in other countries have still that intensity of dedication to their religion which can fulfill the stated purpose during the last days. But among the people of the new state of Israel, there is only a mockery of faith. They do not believe anymore. And because of their unbelief, they will be forced to drink the bitter cup to the dregs in the years of trouble ahead. Chapter 15. Mexico has lost her imagination. Once this country was the home of extraordinary vision and the ability to bring that vision into reality. The paintings by Rivera and others have a characteristic unlike any other painter in history. But now this faculty has been extinguished by the drabness of the state and the iron control by which the country is administered. In the years to come, a brief rebirth of this quality will be seen in Mexico, but it soon must disappear before the onslaught of the karma which this country must face in the tribulation years. Out of the chaos that will follow, there will arise a powerful dictator who will attempt to force the country into a fascist mold. Through the intervention of prayer, this catastrophe can be averted, but only if the Mexicans themselves join in the supplication to the Most High. If they do not, then a major test will have been failed, and the country will be dragged down to its destruction in the final phases of the years of trial. Chapter 16. Denmark has lost her morality. The country that once was strong and upright has fallen to the depths of depravity and moral decay. She has become a stench to heaven. The degradation cannot be allowed to continue. When the time of trial descends upon the earth, this country will drag itself even further into the quagmire of sensuality, and in that quagmire she will sink, never to be seen again. The lesson of Denmark is plain. When a nation loses her moral fiber, the ground beneath her feet becomes a quicksand, and she must at last sink to her destruction out of the view of nations that have remained upright. The path that Denmark has followed will tempt all nations in the tribulation years. Some will succumb while others will stand aloof from the degradation. The ones who fail this test will find the times more harsh and bitter than those that choose purity. Chapter 17. Hong Kong has lost her light. There was a time when this tiny island could hold high the serene lamp of freedom which she had inherited from England, so that the darkened souls in neighboring countries could see that it was possible for man to live in liberty, even in crowded conditions and without any natural bounty in the land. But Hong Kong has fallen far. She gives now only token assistance to the many thousands of wretched souls who exist in poverty and disease. And her lamp has faded to a feeble glow that from distant lands in Asia is hardly visible at all. In the trial, now upon the earth, Hong Kong will be protected so long as her people preserve what they can of the freedom and liberty which England passed to her. But if they fail to maintain their grasp on the truth that man exists for freedom and not to serve the state, then the fires will quickly engulf her, and she will be swallowed up without a trace. Chapter 18. Japan has lost her last chance. The loss occurred many decades ago when she decided to perpetrate the ultimate annihilation against the human race. She encouraged her sons to cast away their own lives while seeking to take the lives of others. For this sin against the very essence of creation, she cannot be allowed to share in the rebirth of the world after the tribulation years have faded from memory. She will be swallowed up by the earth itself, for only a being of immense grandeur could possibly absorb the great karmic burden which Japan carries still for her transgression against all that reality means. Chapter 19. Tibet has lost her body. The land on which she once stood has been swallowed up by a godless people who hold in contempt all that the mystic fathers of Tibet taught to the world. It is a sacrifice akin to that which the Master himself made on Calvary, and like him, Tibet will be resurrected after the darkest days of the trial have passed. For within Tibet are hidden still the records of the race and a chronicle of the history which even now is being played out. After the tribulation, all the greatest leaders of mankind will drink deep from the cup of truth which Tibet has guarded through the centuries for this very time. Chapter 20. Belgium has lost her anchor. In times past, she had a firm grasp on the truth about mankind. She understood that men were equal, and that the state exists to serve men, not the reverse. When she finds the key that will restore her grasp of the truth, she will rise again to take her place among the foremost nations of the world. But she must be tested in the fire, and the fire is close at hand. Belgium will be faced with a decision. She must choose either to side with evil or to stand aloof and hold her truth like a light above the clash of the storm. She can be helped by prayer. This country is closer than most to the ideal human society. It will not be difficult for her to straighten the ways that have become tangled and snarled. If all nations were as near to perfection as Belgium, the world would not have to be purged in the fierce times that are coming. Chapter 21. Australia has lost her leadership. She was intended to be the pivotal nation in Southeast Asia and to bring the benefits and the bounty of the British way of life to the primitive souls in the countries round about. She has not taken up this task with the fervour that was hoped, and yet she is not totally lacking in this virtue. For that reason she will be preserved along with Canada and the United States almost up to the end of the tribulation period. But she, too, is destined for rebirth, and so the structure and stability which she now enjoys must be destroyed in the last phase of the chaos afflicting the earth. Chapter 22. Scotland has lost her charm. In the past she was to all English, speaking peoples a misty land of legend and valour which caught the imagination, and which kept alive in the hearts of men the truth that there is much more to existence than that which is seen by the physical eyes alone. The experiment of Findhorn was intended to help the Scottish people themselves find again the mystic but childlike approach to life which accepts without prejudging, and which knows that the veils that shroud man's eyes from the higher realities hide much. In the new age, about to burst like a golden dawn upon this planet. Scotland will help those whose higher sight is beginning to reopen to understand the reality of that which their new eyes will see. It will be a time of joy and wonder, an era when all men will understand the truths which Scotland has harbored in her soul for millennia. Chapter 23. Ireland has lost her integrity. The lesson which this land was meant to teach the rest of mankind was simple. It was that two religions could exist side by side in one country, without engendering animosity and hatred between members of the two groups. Yet even the fact that both religions were founded to carry the light that one man brought to the earth has not been able to prevent the blood from flowing or the spectre of death from hovering over the land. If man cannot learn brotherhood and tolerance within the very religious structure that is founded on the idea of love and forgiveness of enemies, how then are rival religions and rival political systems ever to tolerate each other? The Irish experience has demonstrated in terms none can deny that there is a flaw in the human heart which must be eradicated, one so serious in its implications that, until it is rooted out forever, no chance exists for universal love to flower on the earth. In the time of trouble that is coming upon the planet, the Irish people will be aghast at the fury with which the nations are destroying each other. In that stark demonstration of the hatred and bloodlust in man's soul, they will come at last to see that all men are brothers, and that love and goodwill represent the only true attitude which any person should have toward another. Chapter 24. England has lost her majesty. Once this nation ruled the seas and brought the order of her customs to many peoples. Her understanding of the value and integrity of the individual was among the greatest gifts she bestowed upon the rest of the world. The justice of the parliamentary system which was adopted by her colonies has stood them well through the tests of time. She is to be honored among the nations of the world for the greatness of her vision and the generosity of her spirit. But England's glory is a thing of the past. Her people have become grasping, indolent, and suspicious. She will not attain again the heights she once knew. In the difficult years ahead, she will rediscover the sense of purpose that was laid aside after the First Great War, and she will contribute as an equal among nations to the new civilization that mankind will build. Chapter 25. Canada has lost her mission. She was given a task to perform for the world, which was to guard all that was best in the British tradition. She has a parliamentary system, as England has, and a just system of laws among men. But she has lost the vision she once had. In the past, this country was to all peoples an example of brotherhood, cooperation, and justice. She knew the value of the individual, and she taught her children to believe in the right. In the years to come, she will find that her system will be a refuge against the onslaught of the tribulation. She will be protected almost up to the last from the full fury of events. But Canada too must be reformed, and this can only come about after the present structure is shaken down. Her people will find a new vision which to them will seem somehow familiar, as if they had known all along that it was to be this way. They will be the earliest to rebuild in the new mold, and Canada will be a great leader in the next century. Chapter 26. America has lost her generosity. Once, when the world was groaning in the aftermath of a great and terrible war, she stood forth with her riches in her hand, offering them freely to those who had been broken by the strife. She did not refuse to give of herself, of her wealth, of her energy, and of her love. What Europe has become today is largely a result of the generosity of the American spirit and the ideals of brotherhood, which this country has held so high. But today, America has drawn back and has closed the door to other nations. She has sealed herself behind a wall and refuses to offer help to those less fortunate than herself. This great country must have its rebirth along with all the rest. In many ways, she is the greatest nation the earth has ever known. But she is flawed today by a blindness which has crept into her perception of the world. In the terrible years ahead, although she herself will be preserved almost to the end from the full onslaught, she will see with increasing alarm the destruction and the loss which the baser passions of man will bring. At last, In an agony of the soul, America will again stand forth with her love to rescue and nurture the peoples of the world whose nations have collapsed and disintegrated in the terrors that man has brought upon himself. By that act she will, again and for all time, be purified. In the new age that will dawn for mankind, America will lead the world as a great and burning beacon of truth, of justice, of peace, and of purity. Chapter 27. North America has lost its roots. This paradise was deliberately created on the earth to be the new Atlantis, a rich garden into which humanity's most evolved fraction would be allowed to incarnate. The twin nations of Canada and the United States have been carefully guided from higher planes through all of their initial phases to ensure that godliness, honor, and moral rectitude would lie at the very foundation of their national structures. The laws which protect the individual from coercion by others and the constitutions which shield him from the oppression of government are bulwarks against the erosion of liberty that has stained so many other countries. The traditions of freedom in this oasis shine out like a great flame for the rest of the darkened planet, showing all who can still see truth that slavery need not be the lot of humanity, and that there is a path out of the bog of wretchedness that has entrapped 3/4 of the world. Yet that flame shines not as it once did. In times past, the consciousness of the North American people clung to these traditions of liberty and equality with great tenacity, and through their steadfastness, a wondrous ray of light from the eternal was anchored into the land where these nations stand. But now that consciousness has dimmed, as the evil root of greed and self-seeking has pushed all nobler concerns into the background, soon there will be a reawakening. The traditions of fairness and freedom will come alive again, but this time with an added awareness that the human family is destined to reunite itself in brotherhood and caring, and that love must now lie at the basis of all that mankind undertakes. The time is not far off, though the path must first win through a season of sorrow and shock for the race. Yet all who steadfastly cling to the light of God's countenance will find their feet at last stepping forth into his eternal gardens of praise, where tears are shed only for happiness, and the laughter of his
children fills every dancing day with joy.
Section 2. The Cities of the Earth. It has been thought that the urge in mankind to congregate together to form towns and cities arises merely from a wish to secure mutual defense against the natural elements and the animal kingdom, coupled with the desire for the companionship of others. However, this picture is not a complete one. The drives we have just mentioned are real, but the true spiritual reason for man's wish to live in densely populated centers relates to his ultimate goal of reunion. First within his own family, then later with the rest of the created cosmos. It is a goal that will not be fully realized until many major changes and progressions have taken place, affecting humanity, but the urge to reunite is always present in the race of man. This urge has been responsible not only for the formation of towns and cities, but for other phenomena as well. Chief among these is the phenomenon of sexual attraction, the sexuality of the race, the fact that it manifests as the two poles known as male and female was arranged to provide a channel along which the innate urge to reunite could be directed. It must be understood that the manifestation in two sexes is not the only scheme that has been utilized within the cosmos, although it is common on the Earth for all complex life forms. In some planetary races, all individuals are the same sex. There is really no sexual polarity at all. Reproduction takes place through a form of autogenesis, each individual being able to reproduce itself through an internal process. For mankind, however, it was thought that the sexual polarity would be ideal, at least for the elementary stages of spiritual development, since it would encourage a coming together of paired individuals which could represent to each of them at a symbolic level the great distant goal of general reunion, which is a reunion among the entire race. We have implied that mankind is at an elementary stage in its spiritual evolution, and this requires further comment. When man began on this planet, he was extremely primitive in terms of soul vibration. There was innocence too, but in order to bring the race to a fully mature status in a spiritual sense, that innocence had to be left behind in the new adventure of materiality. By this, we mean that mankind was intended to plunge itself into the physical world, identify with things, manipulate and build with the stuff of reality, invent the fiction of personal ownership of property, and finally, to conclude erroneously, that the material plane was all that existed. That last stage, the atheism of the utter materialist, has been experienced by every human soul, even by those who now are convinced that higher realities do exist. The atheistic conviction has represented the lowest point on the circuit of descent and ascent, the pivotal moment when, for many souls at least, a new glimmer of truth was made available. That truth has come in many forms, but all of the forms have had in common the ability to start the mind wandering, reaching out, seeking some worldview that would not fall prey to the utter despair that theism always brings. Many human souls have not yet glimpsed that truth, have not yet risen out of the mudsinks of materialism. For these, the shocks of the time of trouble have been arranged. As they begin to see the worldly structures disintegrate around them, the structures which they have taken to be all there is, they will be forced to rethink their philosophies. And in that pondering many will find the key to liberation from the shackles which they themselves have fashioned. In many ways, the cities of man's present civilization have concretized those worldly structures, making them appear more and more to be the mainstay of reality. They can even lead the person who lives an entire life within the confines of a typical large city to the conclusion that mankind has achieved all advances without any external help or support, simply because the reminders of that help are not available. The smog hides the stars from view. The natural growing things struggle for a poor place among the ubiquitous and imposing concrete edifices. Even the mighty rivers that flow through so many major cities are robbed of their majesty. Their waters are polluted and malodorous. Their surfaces are insulted by flotsam and debris. Their natural flow is stopped by dams. There is little wonder that the city dweller loses sight of the great cosmic dance and forgets that the universe does not end at the last subway stop. This general veiling of truth within the great cities of civilization has come about because of man's own decisions regarding the way each metropolis is to be constructed. It is, however, important to note the many subtle degrees of difference from one city to another, these distinctions always representing symbolically certain corresponding truths about the general population of the different centers. And here we wish to explain that correspondence in greater detail to allow the reader to assess any large city in terms of its general level of spirituality. The first area that should be looked at is the room given to the two lesser kingdoms, the vegetable and the animal. The size and quality of the parklands within any large city are a direct revelation of the way in which plant life is regarded. The more space given to this great kingdom upon which man's very existence depends, the more evolved and compassionate is the attitude toward all lesser species, but especially the trees, bushes, and plants. To assess the attitude of the general populace toward animal life, look at the condition and location of the city zoo. Is it small with cramped quarters for the caged beasts, or is it broad and free, with land for them to roam, even places for them to roam? Even places for them to hide away from contact with humanity? Are the beasts kept in with iron, or is humanity kept out with moats and the like? Above all, has the zoo been placed within the confines of the city for the convenience of the people, or in the adjacent countryside where the animals can commune with the natural unspoiled surroundings? All of these considerations tell you what is uppermost in the minds of the people. The subway system of any large city bears a direct relation to the collective unconscious of the city's population. If the subway is dirty, dangerous, and vandalized like that in New York, then you may draw appropriate conclusions as to the contents of the general subconscious mind. On the other hand, if the subway system is clean like Toronto's, or imaginative, like Montreal's, or fantastically complex, like that in Paris, then again you are led directly to the appropriate conclusion. The police force in any metropolis represents the degree of coercion and violence inherent in the people, taken as a cross-section. If the police look like bullies, or are armed to the teeth, or treat the population with disdain, they are merely reflecting back some corresponding internal trait which the people have. Conversely, if the constabulary is polite, clean-looking and unobtrusive, then here again a reflection phenomenon is occurring. The people are likewise polite, respectful of others, and little inclined toward coercive or forceful behavior. Many of the world's great cities lie on the shores of rivers, lakes, or oceans. Such cities, of course, have waterfront areas where boats dock or where people can fish and walk by the water. The general state of the waterfront areas tells with great precision how in touch the people are with their own feelings and how they regard emotions generally, since water represents feelings and emotions at the symbolic level. If the waterfront is dirty, dangerous, smelly, a hangout for hoodlums, then you will know that the populace of the city is not well in touch with the feeling nature of the race. However, if effort has been made to beautify the waterfront area, build parks by it, erect attractive buildings directly at the water's edge, then you will know that the population is not afraid of the emotional nature and wishes to integrate it fully into their lives. The water itself should also be examined for smell, pollution, and muddiness, since it directly represents the emotions. Finally, the controlling consciousness of a city is symbolically embodied in its main municipal building, the City Hall. If this edifice is clean, attractive, and well landscaped, you know something of the prevailing general consciousness of the city. In some centers, the City Hall is very unusual, like that in Toronto. Here is a symbol of the unusually forward-looking consciousness of the people, a readiness to depart from old and worn-out forms, an openness with regard to the future. In other places, the City Hall is drab, or undistinguished, or neglected. Again, you may draw appropriate conclusions. We have developed in this short essay a system by which to decode the symbols which are inherent in most of the world's great cities. However, we stress that this is merely one instance of the symbolic approach to life, an approach which can be applied successfully to any area of experience: your body, your own home, your clothing, the circle of friends which you attract to yourself. All of these are brimming over with hidden meaning and significance for you as an individual. Only meditate upon this concept for a while, and you will soon perceive the wealth of information that has literally been staring you in the face all your life. Section 3. Conclusion by Hilarion. This book has been transmitted for several purposes. The first is to allow an overview of events on the earth plane, which is more spiritually oriented than viewpoints typically expressed by man. The second is to offer to incarnated souls certain lessons in the form of allegories, based on the experience of the nations now on the earth. Few souls realize that one of the most important reasons for allowing the time of the nations, as the recent phase of Earth history is called, is to permit various states to pass through learning phases and to set aside karma in exactly the same way that human souls do. By observing the scenes taking place on the great stage of history, those who live on the earth can perceive on a grander scale the same process of learning and retribution which applies to human individuals. Those who are hesitant about this point are invited to read again some of the entries preceding this commentary, especially Japan, Iran, Germany, France, and America. Here are countries passing through essentially human lessons and setting aside karmic burdens in the same way that man himself does. A final purpose for this booklet is to offer an exercise in prophecy, not to prove that we at this level can see the future more clearly than is possible from the earth plane, for this is not so, but rather to demonstrate that prophecy is a complex matter which can misfire, and that prophetic utterance should always be looked upon as if stating probabilities which may or may not come about, depending upon the reactions of those to whom the prophetic warning is delivered. True occultists have always understood that the best prophet is the false prophet, i.e., the one whose warnings of things to come have so impressed his listeners that they, by altering their hearts and minds, were able to avert the events which the prophet foresaw. Indeed, the only real justification for prophecy is the possibility that it will prompt those upon whose ears it falls to alter their lives for the better, and thus to improve their souls. For this reason, it will be seen that some of the prophetic statements which we have made in this book will not materialize, or will do so in altered form. If the alteration is a lessening of the blow, then we can only be pleased at the result. Indeed, the whole purpose of this little booklet, as well as the other books in the series, is to prompt as many souls as possible to abandon their old materialistic and selfish ways, and to take up the cross of service to their brothers. For by so doing they will kindle within themselves a warm flame which will shield them from the adversity and trouble that is beating even now at the doors. We have spoken in our other books about a 7-year tribulation for the race, and have suggested an early schedule for that time of affliction, ending by the mid-80s. This timetable has now been altered, thanks to the great efforts of the spiritual seekers of the world. But the general requirement that the earth be purged of darkness by the end of the 20th century remains in force. At the time of this dictation, only a few short years remain to bring about changes in the minds and hearts of humanity so far, reaching that few would believe they were even possible. But we believe them to be not only possible, but readily attainable, if only you, who have become persuaded of the truth, can pluck up the courage to speak of your convictions. Many of your brother souls are hungering for the truths which you know in your heart. Speak out whenever you find an opportunity. Your guides, all of the great souls who have given so much to raise the spirituality of the race throughout the centuries, even the great God of all that is, are counting on you to reach out to your brothers in this, their greatest hour of need, their darkest hour of dread. Do not fail them, for then you have failed yourself. May the peace and blessing of all the higher beings who care for humanity's struggle be with you forevermore. Om Mani Padme, Hum Mani Padme, Hum.